Hi everyone, my name is Apuraj Garakapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Apai.
I summon the ancient spell. Reveal your worlds. Every story has a world.
With Mana screamed across the battlefield with immense power. It struck the earth just behind the enemy's front line, startling the horses. One soldier shouted that they were still far out of range, but his relief was short-lived. A giant explosion erupted from the bolt and, gulping everything in its vicinity. The soldiers realized they were facing magic, as the shockwave threw them from their horses. Chiron and his officers came to a dead halt, staring at the carnage and disbelief. Gritting his teeth, Chiron demanded to know what kind of trick Logan had pulled this time. Logan, observing the chaos, noted that the enemy's front line was thoroughly shaken. He turned to Clayton to issue a command, but no words were necessary. Clayton nodded and turned to his disciples, telling them it was time to act. They began imbuing rocks with mana in preparation for their next move. Clayton glanced at one particular disciple with blue hair, Victoria. He asked if she was sure she was ready, and Victoria firmly replied that she was fine and could handle her part alone. Now a trained apprentice, Victoria was determined to show the enemy her strength and composure, fighting with all her wits and might. Just a short while ago, Kaisalan had spotted the weapons their enemies were carrying, realizing with a shock that they also possessed automatic crossbows. Logan shaded his eyes against the sunlight, observing the field, and remarked that unless the enemy was holding weapons that only happened to look identical, that was exactly what they were. Kaisalan wondered how Logan could even identify them from such a distance. Logan, meanwhile, reflected the technology was bound to leak eventually, but he hadn't expected Befros to be the one to distribute it. He then realized the leak must have originated with Rena during their first encounter after she had broken their engagement. Logan turned to his troops and ordered everyone equipped with explosive bolts to move to the front. He declared that they would permanently destroy the enemy's automatic crossbows before they ever had the chance to use them. Nearby, a golem's massive hand rose from the earth as Clayton and his disciples conjured a small army of the constructs. Beside them sat crates filled with blue marbles, the Liberatio explosives developed by Clayton and Hammer. Clayton informed his team that they had plenty of ammunition and urged them to throw as many as necessary. Victoria clenched her hands, her mind focused. Having mastered First Circle magic, she was determined to prove she could handle her duties alone. Her motivation was simple. She was doing this for her brother Sake. With a sharp command, she ordered her golem to strike. The golem prepared and launched the bombs like bullets toward the enemy lines. As they fell, the marbles glowed a menacing red. An enemy soldier barely had time to ask what they were before the world dissolved into fire and explosions. Chiron Wolves stood speechless, paralyzed by the carnage. One of his soldiers reported that Logan was utilizing magic, warning that their forces, though 1,000 strong, could be decimated by a mage of that caliber. Infuriated, Chiron realized he had to close the distance immediately. He ordered his cavalry to charge, reasoning that if the two armies became entangled in a melee, Logan would be unable to use large-scale magic. Kaisalan ordered his own men to reload and fire. A rain of arrows arched through the sky, approaching the enemy at incredible speeds. However, the enemy knights blocked the barrage with ease using their shields. Kaisalan noted this was expected. Once a warrior reached the level of a knight, mere arrows wouldn't take them down. The goal, however, was simply to unhorse them. Kaisalan glanced at Victor, who nodded in silent understanding. Victor turned to his cavalry and ordered them to split, instructing the men to maintain their distance while harrying the enemy's broken formation from the flanks. On the ground, the enemy soldiers struggled to block the constant fire. One grumbled that the barrage wouldn't have been an issue if they hadn't been unhorsed, but he was silenced when arrows began pouring in from his side. The enemy soldiers began to fall like leaves in the wind. Victor rode into the heart of the fray, his heterochromatic blue and red eyes gleaming majestically. He recalled the conversation where Logan had given him this command. Logan had started to explain why a knight like Victor would be tasked with such a maneuver, but Victor had cut him off, simply stating he would do it. His only request to Clayton had been to protect his sister at all costs, his expression turning menacing as he'd admitted he didn't know what he might do if she were harmed. Logan had smacked him on the head then, telling him to chill out. He assured Victor that Clayton would take excellent care of Ree and told him to focus on his own survival for her sake. Victor had bowed, acknowledging that his ability to even have dreams for the future was thanks to Lord Logan. Now, as he charged, Victor thought of Ree and Logan, placing their safety and comfort above his own. Coming to a halt at the perfect vantage point, he ordered his troops to strike from the rear and raise the enemy to the ground. Logan surveyed the battlefield, his eyes sharpened by mana to pierce through the distance. He noted to Patrick that Victor and the crossbow cavalry were successfully moving to the rear, which Patrick took as their cue to engage. Patrick whirled around, ordering his knights to provide immediate assistance. Max Peretta and his soldiers were also in position, though Max briefly questioned his orders. He quickly obeyed and led his men charging toward the fray. On the battleground, Kaiserlin raised his fist high, signaling his units to hold their fire. In the center of the enemy lines, a man in heavy armor huffed under the sudden silence. This was the Wolves' Knight Captain, Nick Marcel, known as the Swordbreaker, who gripped a massive, long blade. Nick was momentarily speechless, wondering if the McLean forces had already run out of ammunition. He quickly realized his error and his expression shifted to dread as he saw Logan and the knights approaching at full tilt. Nick realized they were launching a direct head-on assault. He found it absurd that a group of backwater knights, led by a single, high-ranking lord, would attempt such a move. Planting his feet firmly, he tightened his grip on his weapon, reminding himself that war was ultimately decided by knights and mages. He believed that regardless of the soldiers' equipment, the side that broke the opposing knight order would see victory. As Logan closed the distance, Nick imbued his blade with mana and lunged, screaming for Logan to die. Suddenly, Nick's sword shattered under the intense pressure of the force he had channeled. He swung the hilt, sending the razor-sharp fragments of the blade flying toward Logan and his crew like shrapnel. Logan realized Nick had purposefully broken the sword to use the fragments as a one-time, high-powered projectile. Logan slammed his foot against his stirrup and leaped high into the air, gripping Lux with his right hand. Imbuing his sword with mana, he declared that crossbows weren't his only ace. Logan descended with every ounce of his power, the force of his landing shattering the earth beneath him. Nick, who had been carrying spare swords, managed to draw another and block the strike. He smiled, believing he had successfully warded off the danger. However, Logan's attack was concentrated with the precision of a drill. The sheer pressure snapped Nick's second blade, and the captain could only watch in horror as Logan's sword lunged for his eyes. Nick tried to dodge, but the blade pierced his chest. With Nick's guard completely broken, Logan moved in for the final blow. He unleashed a powerful swing that Nick had no hope of parrying. Blood splattered across Logan's cheek as the blade struck Nick's neck, sending his head rolling away from his body. Logan stood tall amidst the wreckage and shouted for all to hear that the enemy knight captain had fallen. Chiron Wolves was terrified, unable to comprehend how his captain had been defeated so easily. Looking across the battlefield, Logan noted that in this brief clash, the House of Wolves had suffered more losses than in the previous half-year of the Civil War. Realizing the battle was lost, Chiron ordered an immediate retreat. The coward was the first to flee, deciding he wouldn't bleed his forces any further just to slow Logan down. In his haste, he tried to grab his crossbow. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Apai grow naturally, but it slipped from his fingers and was lost. The weapon he had fought so hard to obtain was gone. Logan stood in the center of the battlefield and ordered his troops not to pursue Chiron, but to regroup and reorganize instead. He watched Chiron flee, noting that the enemy had collapsed. The moment their front line broke, surveying his own side, he saw that Patrick had personally taken down several advance knights. Hinckley approached Logan with the casualty report. 5 knights seriously wounded and 2 dead. With roughly 100 soldiers injured, Hinckley smiled, declaring it an overwhelming victory against a border duke. Logan felt a flush of pride, but cautioned his men to stay calm and not get ahead of themselves. Hinckley noticed a shift in the atmosphere, looking toward the main army, and wondering if they had witnessed the McLean victory as clearly as he had. Logan, his mind on Duke Jordan Valterman, mused that he would show the Duke even more material might. Valterman would have to think very carefully about how he planned to treat the McLean house from now on. In reality, Jordan Valterman was truly amazed. He reflected that while the battlefield looked fierce on the surface, the ones actually being ground down were merely the weak, lesser nobles. From his perspective, those with nothing to lose needed only to watch safely from the sidelines, as those pretending to be obedient revealed themselves as traitors. Jordan believed this skirmish had served that exact purpose. He informed the nobles behind him that, judging by the clear outcome of the clash, the MacLeans were now at least on par with the Marquis of Calia. The nobles standing behind him were struck with disbelief, seeing the fright on their faces. Jordan asked what the problem was, noting that the power Logan displayed was effectively theirs to use now. The two nobles remained skeptical, arguing that if Logan were to betray the faction, they would be in serious trouble. Jordan privately agreed, thinking that trouble was an understatement. They would be crippled. Looking up at the sky and seeing the various banners, Jordan recalled Logan's arrogant demands: recognition of the Bifrost territory, half of the Calia Marquisate, and a count's title. He gripped his reins tighter, deciding to let it slide for now, but he vowed that Logan would one day pay the price for such arrogance. He turned to his commanders, ordering them to signal all units that the MacLeans were moving to strike the enemy's rear, declaring that a full-scale war had truly begun. On the other side of the battlefield, the first prince received word of the wolves' retreat and was far from pleased. He demanded to know if they were pulling some trick, or if they had simply been a bunch of ragtag fools all along. Juan Douglas, who delivered the report, noted that the bat-like MacLeans were hiding more venom than they had anticipated. The first prince screamed, asking if Juan intended to just stand there and watch. Maintaining his composure, Juan advised the prince that now was the time to fortify their defenses. He warned that once the MacLeans attacked from the rear, the main enemy front would likely charge as well, and urged the prince to stay close to him. The first prince was baffled by the shift in momentum, while Juan fumed silently, calling the MacLeans traitors and wishing for them to come closer so he could tear them to shreds, regardless of the cost. Everyone's eyes were now fixed on Logan's next move. Lucien found the entire situation ridiculous. The most noble men in the country were ignoring the massive battlefield before them, focused entirely on a single, distant barony. He wondered who this war was even being fought for. The MacLean troops continued to accelerate, but their trajectory began to shift. Both Juan and Jordan watched in confusion, wondering what Logan was doing. Logan had decided to move away from the enemy's rear entirely. Patrick asked his son if they were really just going to keep going, worried about what they would say to the leadership when they returned. Logan turned to his father and remarked that Valtramine likely never expected them to actually hit the rear in the first place. He had just wanted them to stir up chaos and die off. Logan pulled out a small piece of paper, declaring that instead of joining a pointless death, they were going to do something that actually mattered. When Patrick asked what he was planning, Logan smiled and told him they were going to start looting empty houses. A week later, the first prince and Juan Douglas were sequestered in a room, the prince casually eating grapes. The prince noted that they had heard nothing of the MacLean since the battlefield incident and wondered aloud if they had simply vanished into thin air. As Juan sat reading a document, a soldier suddenly burst into the room, slamming the door open and shouting that there was an emergency. Annoyed, Juan barked at the soldier for causing such a ruckus in front of His Highness, but the soldier insisted the matter was urgent. He leaned in and whispered to Juan, whose expression immediately shifted to one of complete shock, noticing the change. The first prince demanded to know what was wrong. Juan turned to the prince and spoke a single name to Arain Castle. The name alone seemed to stir fear in the prince's eyes, but Juan wasn't finished. He added that it wasn't just Arain Alston and Fairness had been hit as well, sweating. Juan told the prince the one thing no sovereign ever wants to hear during a war. All of their primary supply bases had been burned to the ground. The man responsible was Logan, who currently stood before one of the blazes. Watching the flames, he remarked that it was burning well while holding a piece of paper in his hand. He looked down at it. Glad they had followed this specific route. He thought back to the child naming ceremony for Felix, where he had squeezed the information out of a Kiros, specifically the details of the Kiros tray route. Since the head of that house was the largest grain merchant in the country, it was obvious they would be handling the logistics for the first prince's faction. Logan huffed, almost unable to believe his own success. Destroying 3 castles in a single week was truly impressive. He dropped the paper into the fire and noted that the first prince's faction must have truly let their guard down. As the paper was consumed by the flames, Logan took one last look at the burning castle and ordered his people to withdraw. He smiled to himself, silently thanking his uncle for the delicious meal. The scene shifts back to a Lune castle where a grand banquet is underway. Inside the bustling hall, the air is thick with the chatter of guests. Noting the lavish welcome prepared for Maclean's return, and a fair reportedly organized by the prince's direct order. One of the knights remarks on the unusual atmosphere because they are at war. Every soldier remains in full gear, and the glasses are filled with juice rather than alcohol. Despite the lack of spirits, the room is charged with tension. As all the key figures of the various factions are in attendance, the knights whisper among themselves, wondering if the prince truly intends to treat Maclean's with the status of a border count. One asks about the whereabouts of Count Bofrose, only for a friend to reply between sips of juice that the count had retired early, claiming exhaustion. Hearing this, the knight turns away, pondering in silence as he drinks. It is clear to everyone present, another significant power has officially joined the faction. Nearby, Logan approaches Jordan Volterman. He begins by addressing his broken promise regarding the rear attack, offering his most sincere apologies. Volterman brushes it off, telling Logan not to worry, as the situation was frankly unreasonable. He then fixes his gaze on Logan, asking if he hadn't achieved a different kind of military feat instead. As Logan looks up at Jordan, he thinks to himself that the more he sees the man, the less his nickname seems to fit. He wonders how the title of Blazing Sword could ever suit such a cold serpent. Logan thanks him for his understanding, and Jordan replies that it is only natural. His core principle is that those who achieve merit must receive proper rewards. Sensing an opening, Logan decides this is the moment to push further. He asks Jordan if he can consider his terms accepted. The hall seems to fall silent as eyes drift toward them. Jordan remains still for a moment, then smiles, stating he will give the request positive consideration. Jordan moves to continue, but Logan cuts him off. He begins enumerating his demands once more: the recognition of the Bofrose territory, half of the Kelia Marquis, and finally, the title of Count. Logan smiles, asking if he can take that as a green light. Jordan's silence returns. He looks at Logan and asks if he didn't just say he would give the matters positive consideration, reminding the young man that this isn't a decision he can make alone. As he speaks, he places a hand on Logan's shoulder. Suddenly the atmosphere shifts. Under the weight of Jordan's hand, Logan feels a strange, heavy aura. Jordan smiles, remarking that while youthful boldness is admirable, Logan should also consider the circumstances of his elders. Logan struggles to find an answer. Jordan tightens his grip and Logan realizes what is happening. Jordan is suppressing his opponent's aura, causing them to psychologically shrink in a way so subtle the victim barely notices. A very fine skill to have. Logan thinks. Logan bows his head. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. Apologizing to Walter Mean for overstepping. With his hands still firmly planted on Logan's shoulder, Walter Mean dismisses it as a symptom of youth, even as Logan appears to tremble under the pressure of the aura. Internally, Logan remains calm. He has already secured what he truly wanted. Jordan continues, noting that the weapons Logan used in the recent conflict were quite impressive. He asks if Logan would consider sharing them, suggesting that with such arms, they could easily win the war. Logan bristles, realizing Jordan is essentially demanding the technology for free. He apologizes, explaining that they have no spares left, making the request difficult to fulfill. Jordan exerts his ability once more, asking, "Is that so?" Under the renewed pressure, Logan appears forced into a stuttering apology, though his internal thoughts remain defiant. Jordan finally smiles and releases his grip, admitting he might have been holding on too tightly. He tells Logan to go enjoy himself and rest, turning back one last time to mention that the next battle is approaching soon. As Logan watches him walk away, he thinks, what a bastard. Only his force core had protected his spirit from Jordan's influence. Without it, he would have been completely manipulated. As Logan turns to leave, wondering if such underhanded tactics are truly fitting for a superhuman, he is intercepted by Lucian. Lucian asks if there really is no supply available, suggesting that Logan could at least provide a sample or a blueprint. Logan searches his memory for Lucien's name, annoyed that the faction members are pestering him one after another. He tells Lucien that while a blueprint isn't difficult to provide, production would take too long to be of any immediate use. Lucien points a finger at him, insisting that if they mobilize all their capabilities, they could produce them in a short time. Logan feigns resignation, saying that if Lucien puts it that way, he cannot say no, an answer that seems to catch Lucien by surprise. As they join hands, Logan's mind is already racing. He decides the crossbows he provides will be weakened versions, like those used by the wolves, and the Liberatio will be a complete fake. We are all in the same boat now, he tells Lucien with a smile, knowing full well they won't have the time to verify the designs anyway. Several days later, the factions find themselves back on the battlefield. A man sweating profusely prepares himself as Logan and Patrick watch with stunned expressions. The man bellows a vow to slaughter the second princes, idiotic bastards, promising to crush them completely, watching the enemy's formation. The second prince turns to Jordan, asking if that specific knight order truly belonged to their ranks. Jordan admits he is unsure, wondering aloud what they were thinking by placing such men in the vanguard. The man leading the charge is identified as the Kyrus Knight Captain, an intermediate-level knight named Alan. As the Volterman army watches the enemy approach, they note that the force seems composed entirely of mercenaries. They observe that even the captain is only at an intermediate level, though their equipment appears remarkably solid. Seeing this, the second prince's knight smile with overconfidence. One knight charges forward, intent on taking the captain down personally. As he lunges, the Kyrus captain's mind races. He knows that to prove his order's innocence, they must take the lead. This had been decided in close chambers. The suspicion had fallen on the Kyrus for allegedly leaking the supply-based location to the Macklings. To avoid further suspicion, this suicidal charge was their only option. The captain recalls the moment a superior handed him a piece of paper, promising to take care of his family for the rest of their lives. The man had practically screamed at him, begging him to give his life for the cause. Accepting his fate, the captain charges into the fray. He sees the second prince's knight smiling as he imbues his weapon with aura, shouting for the captain to die. The knight begins to spear the man away, but at that exact moment, the captain activates the scroll. A blue spell erupts from the parchment. To the onlookers, it looks as though everything in the vicinity is being sucked into a void. The spell is devastatingly powerful. In an instant, nothing remains of the Wolves' Knight Captain. Logan and Patrick stand frozen in shock. Even Jordan and the second prince stare in disbelief. The enemy has unleashed a cold scroll. In a flash, the knights in the radius are frozen solid, their forms resembling white walkers. Jordan's expression shifts from shock to pure fury, as a massive block of ice traps his men. He hisses a curse at the name of Juan. Logan struggles to grasp the situation. His first thought is a chain explosion, but he quickly realizes it was high-level magic. The secret is finally out. One of the weapons that decimated the second prince's faction in his past life, the Blizzard Scroll. Logan realizes that Juan Douglas, a Sixth Circle mage, must be the creator. Such scrolls are incredibly rare, and the materials required to craft them are priceless. That single explosion has already wiped out 3 knights from the Viscount's family. Judging by the reactions of Jordan and the prince, Logan concludes this is the first time that weapon has been used in this civil war. Recovering his senses, Jordan screams at his troops, ordering them to charge. Patrick turns to Logan, insisting they must join the fray, and Logan nods solemnly in agreement. Suddenly, a heavy, rhythmic thudding startles the troops. A single knight emerges from behind the ranks, approaching the battlefield with such presence that the soldiers stand stunned. He commands the crowd to make way, and recognition ripples through the lines. This is the half-giant, Luther Cal. The soldiers scramble to clear a path, whispering warnings to one another to stay silent, fearing he might kill anyone caught in his wake. However, another knight appears, ready to intercept the giant. It is the Tempest Blade, Wicked Kalia, his blade resting casually against the side of his eye. With a sudden burst of speed, Kalia leaps toward the fray, and Luther meets him midair. As he prepares a massive strike, Luther bellows that this is the day he will finally destroy his rival. Kalia, unfazed, calls him a musclehead and vows to be the one to end it. The collision is magnificent, the heavy weight of a mighty hammer clashing against a razor-sharp sword. The surrounding knights and soldiers watch, breathless, as the two aura users collide with sheer, destructive power. Logan immediately warns his troops to avert their eyes if they lack the skill to watch. Facing such raw aura head-on could shatter a lesser man's mind. Even with his heightened senses, Logan finds himself barely able to track their movements. A spectacular duel between a superhuman specialized in physical enhancement and one focused on elemental control. While Logan views it as a profound learning experience, Patrick remains focused on the grim reality of the field, snapping back to the task at hand. Logan calls for Victor and orders the crossbow cavalry to charge. In the center of the battlefield, Count Juvid's knight, Captain Rommel, awaits the onset. He smirks, telling his men that if they can just block the bolts, the McLean force is nothing more than ordinary soldiers. Confident they are prepared for Logan's specialized weapons, he orders his troops to raise their shields. Suddenly, Victor gives a command that catches Rommel completely off guard. The cavalry swerves, surrounding the enemy rather than charging head-on. As Rommel turns to adjust his orders, he notices a shadow falling from above. A rain of arrows descends, and these are no ordinary projectiles. Rommel infuses his shield with aura to block the volley, but the wood and metal crumble under the sheer pressure of the force. He realizes too late that Victor's squad was merely a distraction. Kaiserlin appears, ordering his soldiers to fire another volley. Rommel watches in fury as one of his men is downed by a bolt to the head, cursing his fools for letting their guard down against mere soldiers. He screams for his troops to wrap their shields in force, just as they had trained. On the other side, Kaiserlin encourages his own men, reminding them of the Battle of Tomoto Castle. He tells them not to panic just because the enemy is using force. They are elite marksmen capable of piercing a knight's helmet with a single bolt. As Rommel struggles to hold the line, the world behind him erupts in flames. Panicked cries of bombs and explosions fill the air, but the truth is magic. Clayton and his disciples have joined the fray. Clayton calmly instructs his mages to keep up the pressure, noting they have plenty of liberatio to go around. Victor seizes the moment, ordering his troops to finish off the survivors of the blasts. Rommel watches in horror as his army is crushed by the arrows and bombs of common soldiers. Before he can wonder what the McLean Knights are doing, a blade whistles through the air. Hinckley's sword finds its mark, a deep cut sending blood splattering as Rommel falls for good. Hinckley dismisses the kill, claiming they are simply cleaning up weakened enemies, a task anyone could. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Pi grow naturally. Watching the collapse, Logan notes that this strategy is the best way to minimize their own casualties. He suggests to Patrick that his father might find such tactics cowardly, but Patrick cuts him off, stating that no one is idiotic enough to think that. Patrick points out the larger picture. With Count Judd fallen, a major flank of the First Prince's front has collapsed. Logan agrees, predicting a full retreat is imminent. He decides they have achieved enough merit and shouldn't waste more strength. Kaiserlin spots the retreat signal waving in the rear and relays it to Victor. Victor, coolly shooting one last enemy soldier without even looking, begins to pull his battalion back. As Logan prepares to discuss their next move with his father, a new series of explosions rocks the front line. Logan pales, realizing it is the Blizzard Scroll again. He can't fathom how the enemy possesses so many. Hinckley rides up and Logan frantically asks if the front line is safe. Fortunately, because they pulled back early, even Victor's squad escaped the blast. Jordan Valtramine is livid, screaming at the enemy Commander Hewen for using such filthy methods to escape. He orders a pursuit, but his own captains refuse. One soldier begs him not to chase, but to get as far from the blast zone as possible. Another asks if Jordan simply wants them all to die. Logan watches the chaos of his own side, thinking that while they are powerful, they are a ragtag bunch, just like the Second Prince's faction was in his past life. Suddenly, Logan was seized by a terrifying sensation as a powerful, oppressive aura rapidly approached their position. Victor also appeared to sense the shift, though Logan feared it might already be too late. From high above, a massive boulder of ice seemed to tear through the sky, falling toward them with crushing force. Both Logan and Hinckley stared upward, gripped by a momentary wonder at the nature of the falling object. Logan wasted no time, activating his wind boots to launch himself from his horse directly toward Victor. As he prepared to strike, Logan reflected on the terrifying surge of energy emanating from the projectile. Realizing it would be catastrophic to leave it unchecked, he determined that they had to stop it at any cost. Infusing his blade with a dense layer of aura, he unleashed a fierce cry and swung his sword in one swift, violent motion. Upon contact, the ice boulder began to shatter. Logan fell back under the force of the impact. Watching as the broken fragments started to emanate a strange green light, Logan remained stunned by the display. Hinckley, witnessing the extreme cold radiating from the shards, rushed toward Logan on his horse to check if he had survived the encounter unscathed. Logan appeared to be unharmed, though he immediately began cursing the name of Juan Douglas due to the biting chill. Examining his weapon, Logan noted that the Ice Mage clearly held a deep grudge, as he found himself unable to melt the frost on his blade even by using his force. He marveled at the fact that Juan could detonate a mass of rare scrolls and follow it with such dangerous magic powers, truly befitting a superhuman. It was then that Logan noticed the ice infused with his force had begun to crack, leading him to a sudden realization. Sometime later, near a campfire, a pair of soldiers sat talking, mocking the way the first prince's forces had fled the field. One soldier looked up, remarking that their fortunes had taken a turn for the better ever since the Macleans arrived. His companion agreed, commending Logan's strength and noting how he had cut through Juan's magic as if it were nothing, adding that the Baroni's warriors were surprisingly skilled. From behind a nearby tent, Count Bifrost listened to the soldiers' conversation. One of them predicted that because the Macleans had achieved back-to-back successes, they would certainly receive the grand rewards they had demanded. The other soldier noted that since Duke Valterman was known for being clear-cut regarding rewards and punishments, this likely signaled the end for Bifrost. Hearing this, the Count was consumed by rage, realizing his position was becoming precarious. He concluded that the civil war could not be allowed to end in such a manner elsewhere. Inside a castle, featuring a lion crest carved above the front gate, the sound of a hammer striking wood echoed through the workshop. One of the dwarves Logan had brought in sat at the center of the scene, looking exhausted. Timur collapsed to the ground, throwing a finished crossbow into a crate filled with others. When Hammer demanded he move faster, Timur pleaded for a short break. Hammer leaned in and shouted that there would be no rest as he was due to arrive soon. Hammer described the approaching figure as a brute and a beast who monitored them daily even more strictly than his brother. When the man finally made his presence known and offered a polite apology for the intrusion, Hammer began to tremble in startlement. It was Ronan, who explained that he had only come to offer his support. Hammer was left speechless as Ronan smiled and asked the dwarves to bear with the discomfort of his presence, noting that the successes on the front lines were thanks to the weapons they produced. At this, Hammer and Timur grabbed each other by the neck, laughing and insisting to Ronan that there was no discomfort and they only wished to do their best for the territory. Ronan smiled at their seemingly admirable mindset, and they stood face to face, laughing together. However, as the dwarves thought they had successfully fooled Ronan, they began to sweat. Ronan huffed and looked down at them, noting that since progress was slow he would grant them some leave. As their eyes lit up, Ronan suggested they visit the marketplace to enjoy the sights and food, though he insisted they be accompanied by an escort knight to lift their spirits. Watching them, Ronan recalled a conversation with his brother. Logan had told Ronan to remain home on purpose, explaining that this civil war wasn't their fight and there was no need for the main family to be fully committed. Ronan had lowered his head, realizing that he was being kept back so he could succeed the family if anything happened to the others. Though Logan had tried to comfort him, he also reminded Ronan that they had more castles to defend and a militia that needed supervision. Ronan had firmly told Logan that he was no longer a child, a statement that had startled Logan. Ronan had then put on a kind face, telling Logan to go ahead while he protected the territory instead. Logan had been left at a loss for words, seeing how much his little brother had grown. He had bowed his head, telling Ronan he trusted him, but gave one final instruction: keep a close eye on Hammer, as the dwarf might become a target for kidnapping once their weapons gained fame. Now, Ronan followed Hammer through the market dressed in full armor, noticing the attention they were drawing. Ronan suggested they head back, but Hammer insisted they had only been there 3 days and went to buy some delicious-looking skewers, even offering to get one for the young lord. Suddenly, Ronan sensed something a force user among the crowd. He went on high alert, noting that the aura was so foreign it tripped his force core, suggesting the attacker was concealing their strength. He called out to Hammer that they had seen enough just as a merchant pushing a hay cart passed by. As the man drew close to Hammer, his attitude shifted. He was the assassin Ronan had sensed. Before the man could act, Ronan struck him on the back of the head, asking what he thought he was doing. As the man fell, Ronan grabbed him by the shirt and lifted him, laughing to the crowd that the poor man had simply overexhausted himself. He then dropped the man face first and told a nearby guard to take him to a safe place. Hammer had fallen into the hay, and Ronan noted that everything had happened just as his brother predicted. He mused that they had captured one, and the more prisoners they took, the better. Within the next couple of minutes, the market returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Another merchant held up 2 skewers and informed Hammer that his food was ready, prompting Hammer to happily tell the man to hand them over while remarking on how delicious they looked. Ronan, still cautious, told Hammer that once he received the food, they were heading straight back home. However, it appeared this was not the end of the situation. A mountain of a man placed himself directly in front of Ronan, effectively blocking his sunlight, which Ronan noted was very rude. The man's head was so bald that it reflected light everywhere, and Ronan realized this was a trick designed to block his view of Hammer. As the merchant approached Hammer with the skewers, Ronan sensed that something was wrong. Suddenly, the merchant turned the skewers around and prepared to stab Hammer, who was looking down at his wallet trying to pay for the meal. Seeing this, Ronan immediately pulled out his sword, realizing the 2 attackers were working together. Ronan utilized a specific technique called the flash blade slash to impair both enemies. As a result, one man was left flat on the ground while the merchant's right arm was dismembered. People in the market began screaming about murder. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apai. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.